So he's contemporary with another guy named Martin Luther, another guy named Ulrich Zwingli. There's some later reformers would come, but those were the three main reformers in the early and middle 1500s. All right? And they're all doing the same thing. And by the way, in different places, and at the beginning, unbeknownst to the others. John Calvin and Martin Luther and Ulrich Zwingli, they were not getting together in a cabal at night saying, okay, here's what we're going to do. No, they were doing their own things, but they came to very many of the same conclusions that as one another in different parts of the world, in different schools of thought. But why did they come to some of the same conclusions? Well, because they're reading the same word, they're reading the same Bible that we read today. So that becomes a foundation of what we call the Reformation movement. We talk about Protestants. What's the root word of Protestant? Protest. It was a protest against Roman Catholicism, which was the dominant church at the time. Was it the only church at the time? No, you had Eastern Orthodox at that time. You had very primitive Christianity at that time. There's evidence of other churches, but the dominant church, especially in Europe at that time, was Roman Catholicism. So John Calvin, who does most of his work out of Geneva, Switzerland, he comes along and he says, "Okay, we cannot abide these things that are very much Catholic, and a lot of it coincided with some of the things that Martin Luther saw, that the sale of indulgences, the emphasis on clergy and the hierarchy in Roman Catholicism, a lot of the stuff that he didn't take." So he went back and he started writing. His magnum opus was Institutes of the Christian Religion. And I got to tell you, when you read it, John Calvin's not an idiot. Right? John Calvin is not dumb. He knows the scriptures very well, and he is trying to bring the biblical data set into harmony with one another and with his own thoughts, and trying to best understand. So don't think, I've heard people in the church talk about Calvinism. They're going to do a review of Calvinism, and they act like Calvinism is just a simplistic religion that's just so dumb and easy to counteract. And I got to tell you, it's not that easy. In fact, I think this is a very difficult passage, and it's not because I'm against Calvinism per se. It's not an easy passage. So Calvin, we generally, back, it was not long after he came out with his institutes, they already started writing things about him. And I believe it was somewhere around the 1600s or so, someone came up with what they call the tulip. Calvin, if you've heard the tulip, the 5 points of Calvinism, Calvin didn't write tulip. That was his enemies wrote tulip. But they're not far off with what he believes. In other words, he's probably kicking himself that he didn't come up with tulip. But he wasn't an English speaker, so we forgive him for that. So tulip becomes an acrostic. The T stands for total hereditary depravity. What you often hear is original sin. Total means complete. Hereditary means that it's something we've inherited. And depravity is saying that we're sinners, depraved, enemies of God. All these things that Paul just talked about here in this passage. Total hereditary depravity, that we're all born depraved. And since we are all born depraved, there's nothing good you can do. And therefore you have to have some sort of unconditional election. If there was conditions for what you had to do, then you're saying, well, you can do something good and come into the good graces of God. Therefore, you can't do that. You're totally depraved. Nothing you do is good. So therefore, your election to salvation is unconditional. Well, then if it's unconditional, does that mean everybody's going to be saved? Well, no, not everyone's going to be saved because there was only a limited atonement. The atonement of Christ was for the limited to the elect, the ones God chose to be saved. Everybody else is just lost. There's nothing you can do. And so, well, what if I'm of the elect and I don't know it? Or what if I'm of the elect and I don't want to be in it? It doesn't matter. It's irresistible grace. That's the I. The I stands for irresistible grace. You can't deny it. You can't fight it. God is going to put it upon you. And then, of course, once I'm of the elect, then, and I can't fight it, God's given it to me no matter what. What if I choose to walk away from it? That's perseverance of the saints, the P. You can't fall away. So that's the synopsis we normally give of Calvinism. And of course, the first idea of total hereditary depravity. It has given rise to such things as infant baptism. There's infant baptism in a lot of religions. Why? Well, because they see baptism is necessary for the remission of sins, as it were. And this infant is born totally depraved. And so what's the first thing you want to do? Baptize them, because at least their sins are forgiven at that point. Right? Now later we can teach them about other things. Of course, I think that's a misunderstanding, misapplication of baptism to begin with. But I get it. What I don't get, by the way, are people who don't believe in total hereditary depravity or original sin and yet still use infant baptism. I don't get that one. But I get it. If you believe that they're totally depraved and that child, that infant, 1 day old, is destined for hell, if it were to die. Now mind you, this is at a time when we don't have the medical means that we have today to save most children. I mean, infant mortality rates are way lower now, but think of yourself in the 1500s when infant mortality rates are way higher. And that infant is destined for hell, and it's sickly. What are we going to do? Let's get it baptized. Right? So, therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so spread to all men. Right? So there's this picture. It's Adam. He's going to tell us specifically it's Adam. Sin came into the world through one man, through Adam. And what did Adam do? God said, you may eat of the tree, any tree of the garden, but you may not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? That was the command. Don't eat of this tree. And what did Adam do? Ate that tree, right? Sin. And that's when sin entered into the world, right? And that's also when death entered. Death came in through sin. Sin became the gatekeeper, as it were, to death itself. Now, we talk about death in the Bible, especially in the New Testament. We generally talk about three kinds of death, right? There's physical death, death of the physical body. Then there's spiritual death, right? Our soul, our spirit. And then there's eternal death. Now, sometimes we just lump the last two together. Spiritual death is eternal death, things like that. But the Bible does talk about us being dead in trespasses and sins in Ephesians chapter 2, for example. That he's obviously talking about a spiritual death, and yet he's not there talking about an eternal death yet. So I do see a difference between the spiritual and the eternal. But those are generally the three that we're talking about. So when we look at this, what entered into the world and spread to all men in verse 12? Death. And are we talking physical death or spiritual death or eternal death? What? Yes, maybe. Most commentators, I think, lean toward physical death only. I don't know that I could prove that, but it definitely, when you get into 13 and 14, it's talking about a physical death. But so I don't know. We'll look at that more next week because that's my bell. Someone rang it on me this time. And earlier, last week, they let me go all the way to 6. I thought I had 5 more minutes. That's okay. Man, I love this study. I love it. I really do. Yeah. Yeah. And and that, by the way, Calvinists, they debate, among Calvinists, one of their biggest debates is why evangelize? Why seek the lost? Because if God's going to save them, He's going to save them regardless. I mean, there's some things in there, but each one is, when you look at Calvinism, you have to start with that basis of original sin or total depravity. And when we read these few verses here in Romans 5, it almost sounds like total depravity. And so we're going to see if we can untie that knot. You ever untie a knot? Fishing string, you cast, and then you take your thumb off too early or don't put it on, and that backlash. You ever try to untie that? That's kind of where we are in the middle of the book of Romans 5. All right, I appreciate your attention this week.